Good morning and welcome to the session on the New Green Deal. I'm Julie Proctor from Green Space Scotland and I'll be your chair for this session. This morning we'll be exploring whether nature-based solutions and enterprises can deliver for a green recovery, and we'll be looking at how we can finance nature-based solutions. The format for the session is that we're going to hear from 4 speakers with short presentations, and then we'll move on to a short panel discussion. And a little bit of advance warning, we will be crowdsourcing some responses from you as well, so bear that in mind as you're listening to the presentations. We will be recording the session, so it'll be available for you to watch again, and please do raise any comments or questions as you're listening in the chat column. Before we get started, it'd be really interesting just to get a feel for where you are all from. So if you can click onto the poll and select and let us know whether you're in Scotland, UK, Europe, or the rest of the world. That would be really great to hear that. It's always that thing when you ask people, where are you coming in from? And people might tell you, oh, I'm ringing from my kitchen table or from the spare room. You can't tell us that on the poll, but you know, if you are perhaps dialing in from somewhere interesting, if you've taken your laptop outside into a green space, then please do let us know in the chat. That would be lovely to hear. Okay. I don't know how the poll's going. That's one of the bits I can't see the poll at the moment, but my colleague is going to just let us know how the that's happening on the poll. Okay, I'll leave that for you to see on the screen as that poll is going, and I'll move us on to the introduce the first presentation slot that we've got today. We wanted to start with an overview of policy context in Scotland, but as today is the first day of the pre-election or PERDA period ahead of the Scottish Government elections in May, that meant we weren't able to have anybody from Scottish Government talking with us live today. So I was going to step in and give us a brief overview, just setting the policy context in Scotland in terms of some relatively new policy initiatives which could contribute to supporting investment in nature-based solutions. But then, when the Cabinet Secretary gave her opening address in the first session of the summit on Tuesday morning, she gave a good overview of some of the key policies and funds. So we're going to start the session now listening to a recording of an extract from Aileen Campbell's presentation, and a wee reminder that this was recorded on Tuesday before the pre-election period started. So let's hear now that extract from Aileen Campbell's opening address.
So recovery from this pandemic won't ever be enough if all that ends up happening is reverting back to normal, when that normality has failed too many for too long, and where there seems to have been a tacit acceptance that inequality is somehow inevitable. There is a chance now to start to do things differently, to embrace the positive change that we've seen and to build forward with activity to rebalance our economy and refocus on what matters, with people and good quality green places at its heart. We should seek to ensure our recovery is green. Focus has rightly been placed on the impact of COVID, but the climate emergency has never left us. Therefore, we should use this moment to build from the much more heightened awareness and appreciation of the environment around us and the well-being that green space and nature brings. And as we move to recovery, the restorative power of nature should not be ignored as part of the healing that we all need to do. That is why, through our programme for government, we've committed to supporting 20-minute neighbourhoods, where people can meet their needs within a 20-minute walk from home, including access to green space, enabling people to live better, healthier lives, and supporting our net zero ambitions. And in Housing to 2040, our 20-year housing strategy, we have a focus on the delivery of new affordable homes, but we also recognise the need to also create great places and spaces for people to live, grow and play in. The last year's experience has taught us just how important and crucial it is to get that right. Scottish Government respects the role of nature-based solutions and the multifunctional benefits they can offer. National infrastructure is already integrated in many of our infrastructure programmes such as housing and regeneration, flood, water and drainage management and active travel. We've made some significant injections of funding to support it. Our infrastructure investment plan sets out a long-term vision of infrastructure in Scotland which supports an inclusive net zero carbon economy and includes details on over £26 billion of major projects and large programmes. With overwhelming support through our earlier consultation, we now have the widest definition of infrastructure in the UK and many parts of the world that includes natural infrastructure. This means we can take a more holistic view of our infrastructure assets and recognise the wider contribution that nature can have in creating sustainable places, reducing emissions and improving well-being. These complement our investments of almost £9 billion for environmental sustainability and the transition to net zero emissions. This includes £2 billion dedicated to tackling climate change through our low carbon fund, which provides support for woodland creation, peatland restoration and the reuse of vacant and derelict land. All of these are critical to delivering the infrastructure needed for our transition to net zero by 2045. Our statement of intent for biodiversity sets the direction for a new biodiversity strategy which will respond to the increasing urgency for action to tackle the twin challenges of climate change and biodiversity loss. It highlights the benefit of nature-based solutions such as woodland restoration and creation, peatland restoration and urban green infrastructure for people and nature. And that's why we've committed £250 million over 10 years on peatland restoration and an additional £150 million over the next 5 years in forestry. We're also committed to realising the potential of tiny forests in Scotland, which can support biodiversity and improve urban green space for local communities. We've also welcomed the Vacant and Derelict Lands Task Force recommendations and will work with the Scottish Land Commission and other stakeholders to develop proposals to help deliver a culture change in Scotland's approach to vacant and derelict land. As part of that, I am pleased to announce from this week our new £50 million low carbon vacant and derelict land investment programme is open to applications for funding. This programme will help with tackling persistent vacant and derelict land, delivering regeneration and supporting a green recovery, in turn promoting social justice and well-being across Scotland, especially in more disadvantaged areas. And given the flourishing of our communities as they rolled up their sleeves during the last year to look after each other, it's right that we continue to empower them to support their efforts to tackle climate change. That's why we've committed to developing a network of climate action towns that will exploit the co-benefits of climate action, empowering communities to develop greener, healthier, more livable places, whilst contributing to Scotland's response to the global climate and ecological emergencies. We're also working on the next National Planning Framework, NPF4. It's Scotland's spatial plan and will include a review of our planning policy. And some of the most significant policy changes we expect to explore in developing NPF4 will be expanding green infrastructure and natural places, new policies to promote an infrastructure first approach, including green and blue infrastructure, and support for 20-minute neighbourhoods. The pandemic and the desire for a green recovery has prompted us to rethink our neighbourhoods, our towns, our cities and rural communities, to rethink how we live and to reassess what is important to us. And it's clear that nature-based solutions can offer us a different way of doing things that are sustainable and good for the soul and good for our well-being. To deliver this green, fair and human rights-based recovery, government cannot do it on our own, and that's why it is essential that we work in partnership with empowered communities in order that local approaches and contexts are reflected, and because, quite simply, our communities are the experts in what their needs and their aspirations are. Aristotle said, "In all things of nature there is something of the marvellous," and he's right. We have a chance to rebuild a marvellous future, and empowered communities and nature need to be at its heart. Have a great day.
I think that really sets the scene for how here in Scotland the policy landscape is starting to potentially set out that really fertile ground for delivering nature-based solutions. One opportunity that Elaine didn't mention that I'd just like to highlight, because it's one we're quite interested in seeing, is the new power that was set out in the Planning Scotland Act of 2019. And that's a new power for Scottish ministers to establish an infrastructure levy. That levy would be payable to a local authority in respect of a development within the authority's area, and that income from the levy would be used to contribute to funding infrastructure projects. Where this starts to get really interesting from a nature-based solution perspective is that definition of infrastructure now includes green and blue infrastructure. And as we heard from Elaine, we've now got that wider definition around natural infrastructure. So we're no longer just talking about those big engineering and construction projects when we use the term infrastructure in Scottish policy. Those regulations haven't been developed yet, so it is a case of watch this space, but I think potentially a very welcome resourcing mechanism for the future. So, Catherine has joined us on screen now, and we are going to move now from a national policy level to turn our focus to how do we realise those opportunities in a Glasgow city region. So I'd like to introduce Catherine Pearce from SNIFR, and she's going to talk to us about Climate Ready Clyde's work on identifying opportunities for a post-COVID Green Deal. Over to you, Catherine.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name's Catherine Pearce. I'm Innovation Manager with SNIFR. SNIFR is a sustainability charity. We're change makers and knowledge brokers to build a society that has greater resilience to climate change. We're also Secretariat to Climate Ready Clyde, which is a regional initiative for Glasgow City region, working with 15 partner organisations to address current and future climate risks and to build our resilience and adaptation. I am here today to talk about a paper that came from last year, a briefing paper that was produced last summer, looking to the options and priorities for Glasgow City region's response to delivering a green recovery and a Green New Deal post-COVID-19. Obviously, a lot has happened since last summer, but the paper really looked at the possible sort of green recovery and climate resilience options and assessed these against the potential for job creation, economic growth, addressing the existing inequalities to really help prioritise types of investment responses. And today I'm going to be focusing on nature-based solutions. A little bit of a background around Clyde Rebuilt. So this was a project led by SNIFR on behalf of Climate Ready Clyde and co-funded by the EU's Climate Innovation Hub, EIT Climate Kick. The work really focused on innovation to catalyse transformational adaptation, recognise the importance of culture to build broader change, and also the need for transformative finance. And it was co-delivered with Climate Kick, SNIFR, Creative Carbon Scotland, who provided their expertise on the nature and role for culture and creative arts and sustainability, and Paul Watkins Associates, which is a research consultancy with expertise on sort of finance and economics of climate adaptation. So setting the context, Glasgow City region is home to 1/3 of Scotland's population, with a large number of businesses and organisations based here. Latest economic data for Glasgow City region, based on the results of the pandemic, show that overall GDP in Scotland is 7.1% below its level in February of last year. And the numbers of people in the region claiming financial support and benefits due to unemployment has risen by almost 35,000 people since February of last year. The clear need for sort of reprioritisation and reprofiling of public expenditure just generally means that there's less money around, particularly for nature-based solutions. And so for Glasgow City region, this translates into tailoring the green recovery towards its priority needs and sort of regional context. Glasgow City region released its economic recovery plan last December, which really acknowledged the need to build resilience of people to the multiple shocks and stresses, not least COVID, but also climate change, and the need for significant investment in reducing the region's contribution to climate change. It also, as part of a number of different plans and programs, it focused attention on vacant and derelict land, which is perhaps not surprising. The region's home to 50% of the sites of Scotland's vacant and derelict land register. And the plan recognises that that plan and that attention can create jobs, realise economic benefits, tackle climate change, and improve the health and well-being of local residents. By exploring the potential for that vacant and derelict land, can also focus attention to nature-based solutions as well, particularly in an urban context. In terms of other broader policy context in the area and in the region, Clyde Mission is a partnership between Scottish Government and Glasgow City region to bring together public and private sector partners to harness opportunities and competitive advantage of the River Clyde and the surrounding assets to deliver economic, social and environmental benefits. The mission has sort of 5 integrated, interlinked missions. And within that, those 5 missions, there are a number that offer huge potential, let's say, for exploring nature-based solutions based on the benefits, the broader benefits that they bring. So our paper really recognised that there are a number of different interventions and options that can help a green recovery. And again, just sort of focusing here on the nature-based solutions priority. The first one was around direct investment, so real sort of financial investment to support and finance ecosystem-based flood protection, green spaces, landscape restoration, peatland restoration. A second was around sort of policy and regulatory reform, so that sort of reform to enhance resilience. The third was around capacity building and institutional strengthening. So, where are the skills development programs to support expansion of nature-based solutions and maintenance of natural infrastructure? The fifth was around new financial instruments, and this is where the sort of transformative, innovative finance comes into play, looking at the opportunities for sort of blended finance, leveraging private sector investment, and that's certainly going to be needed if public sector finance is vastly reduced due to the pandemic. And fifthly, around sort of transformation. So really how to look to sort of deeper, more fundamental shifts away from existing systems, whether that be sort of shifts in the planning regime towards urban green transformation, rethinking land use development, rethinking measurement models. So sort of how do we get away from our dependence on GDP, and how to reform government and governance planning and policy. So the paper sort of rated a number of green recovery interventions. And again, I'm going to focus on the nature-based solutions options here. But I think it's perhaps important to note that those nature-based solution options and plans really need to be integrated and part of a wider sort of plan, a wider sort of program. And I'll go into that in a couple of minutes. But we focused on 2 measures specifically here on nature-based solutions. So one was sort of upgrading existing green spaces and ecosystem-based adaptation. In terms of the economic recovery and job creation, so employment, economic multipliers, addressing existing inequalities, very high rating there for, very labour intensive, very high sort of job creation. Medium for both sort of mitigation benefits and climate resilience benefits, but also very high in terms of the sort of further sort of reduced pandemic risk and addressing other civil emergencies and disaster risks. And again, this really plays out the huge sort of co-benefits that nature-based solutions provides. We also looked at new green space, again, looking at derelict and vacant land, green spaces, roofs, surface urban drainage systems, and extremely high across all of those 4 ratings. So again, really building an extremely strong case for how nature-based solutions can support a green recovery, and indeed more broadly economic recovery, job creation, and broader sort of societal and health benefits. Just a little sort of touch on the challenges and opportunities. I think there is a tension that when looking at sort of how to crowd in more broadly sort of different elements of finance, different sources of finance, particularly from the private sector. The private sector is really likely only to act when there is the incentive and the financial return to do so. And quite often when we talk about nature-based solutions and sort of more broadly in terms of green recovery options, this is about the sort of classic characteristics of public goods. And private sector find it quite challenging to recognise the incentive and the financial return when public goods are involved. At the same time, though, it's really possible to achieve greater green impact if it's possible to leverage in private finance. The significant amounts of money that are available from private finance mean that programs and nature-based solutions can be really at scale. And finally, public finance is simply not enough on its own. So how to make it happen? Again, nature-based solutions shouldn't sit in a shell, in its silo, really building up a pipeline of projects, package up or bundle up projects and initiatives. So that helps to build that interest and appetite from particularly private sector who really want to invest in big projects and see bigger returns. Build the business case, make it appealing for business, adopt a commercial mindset and explore the potential for revenue. Look to other sources of finance. So how to leverage in sort of private sector finance, how to build sort of innovative and blended models, and how to look to sort of regionally funded support packages for businesses of regional strategic interest. Coordinate with others. So look at that sort of cross-partnership approaches to secure and build a wider range of investment. There's many sort of new and emerging initiatives opening up at the moment. So where are they and how can they be integrated and sort of captured together? So look for the synergies and really sort of integrate nature-based solutions with broader climate resilience measures. And finally, just to sort of raise awareness and promote. There's a very, very strong narrative future for nature-based solutions. And so making sure that benefits are identified and messaging is clear. Just finally to touch on the Glasgow City Region Climate Adaptation Strategy. So this is being developed and designed by Climate Really Cly, by the partners and by broader sort of cohort of actors and organisations who have a role to play in building climate resilience across the region. This is soon to be launched, and the strategy has been looking quite strongly at sort of nature-based solutions, about blue-green ecosystems, the role that they play in building our resilience, but also looking at the other side on the sort of finance side of things. So really looking to explore and establish a regional investment pipeline and adaptation finance lab that would really unlock those new investments that are sometimes quite difficult to identify, to reach out to, and to secure. And finally, just my last slide here is really sort of looking at the potential there in the sort of finance innovation. A finance lab that we're looking to establish will provide this sort of help to steer the sort of governance and hope at how to open up that kind of innovation, but essentially really how to reach out and to secure the sort of blended finance, the sort of the green bonds, and all those new sort of models that are out there, particularly with engaging the private sector, to make that kind of investment in nature-based solutions more readily available, more appealing, and to really recognise where the revenue and where the return can be gained from some of those nature-based solution projects. So bit of a whistle-stop tour there, but there's a lot of information in the paper that's on our website, and further information will be available through the adaptation strategy when it's launched, and a number of different papers and resources are on our website. So please have a look there. But many thanks for your time and look forward to the chat and conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. That was an absolutely fascinating presentation to see the emerging thinking and directions here in the Glasgow City region. We know that resourcing nature-based solutions, particularly at scale, is always a challenge. And innovations typically have been funded by governments, by councils, by municipalities. But as we know, finance is going to get even tighter in that post-COVID recovery world. Attention here and elsewhere is really turning now to private and to corporate finance to look at innovative models, investments, and blended models. And as Catherine said there quite clearly, public sector finance on its own is not enough. So with that, I'd like to introduce you now to Joe Pike from the Scottish Wildlife Trust. And Joe is going to talk to us about innovations in financing urban nature-based investments and the route map for the £1 billion Conservation Challenge and opportunities that that offers for nature-based solutions. So thank you, Joe. Over to you.
So thanks very much for inviting me to speak at today's Innovation Summit. It's certainly a timely event, and in the next few minutes, I'd like to offer a few ideas on how we might learn to finance nature-based solutions just as effectively as we've learned to finance things like renewable energy. Basically, the question is, how can we make the green economy greener? So the Scottish Wildlife Trust has been championing nature-based solutions for a number of years, both in our advocacy work, but also practically on our wildlife reserves. And this picture is from Cumbernauld, and it's a great example of an urban nature-based solution where, among other things, a few years ago, we worked with Scottish Water and created a sustainable urban drainage system. That's basically a series of ponds which have provided habitat for all sorts of wildlife, including otters and badgers and a variety of birds and insects, at the same time as improving water quality and reducing flooding. Meanwhile, in Edinburgh, we've been working with the City of Edinburgh Council and a host of other partners on the creation of an ecological coherence plan for the city through a project called the Thriving Green Spaces. This looks at a variety of habitats and the benefits they provide and is designed to help provide an evidence base to support better decisions and increased investment. And finally, we back in 2018, we also produced a report called Living Cities, and that advocates ecological urbanism, which is an approach to urban planning which puts nature at the centre of the design process in order to create better places and provide solutions to the multiple social, economic and environmental challenges facing 21st century towns and cities. And in that same year, we produced a report called Alive with Nature, working through the Scottish Forum on Natural Capital and Stirling City Council. That looked at the potential economic returns of investing in the city's natural assets as part of discussions connected with the city region deal. It estimated the net present value of a number of interventions over 50 years and calculated an internal rate of return. So if anyone's interested in that, the summary report, which is online, contains a really simple 10-step process that any city or town can use to increase its return on investment. And I'm sure the organisers will be happy to share that link. So I'd like to tell you a little bit this morning about the Scottish Conservation Finance Project and the publication last year of the route map to £1 billion, which was the culmination of a collaborative exercise called the £1 billion Challenge. Now, the project lasted 2 years. It was led jointly by the Scottish Wildlife Trust and the Scottish Environment Protection Agency, but it had a huge amount of input from all sorts of stakeholders and experts. And it was designed to answer the question, how can Scotland generate the first £1 billion worth of new investment in nature conservation in ways that could also deliver social, economic and financial returns? So this wasn't a fundraising target, it was a call to action inviting people to help Scotland become a place where innovative finance becomes, well, I'll show you here, it crosses this chasm of incomprehension and scale and goes from something mysterious and complex to mainstream and actionable. And in practice, I think that if we develop innovative variations on tried and tested mechanisms, we can help Scotland to meet its commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as bridging the gap between the resources going into nature and climate action and the resources currently available. So the route map itself includes 9 opportunities, such as a natural capital pioneer fund. You'll see the little icons demonstrate which of the sustainable development goals are most relevant, and in the top right, whether it's at concept stage, active development, or ready to go. There's a marine fund, an invasive non-native species loans concept, and more. But today, I'd like to pick out the nature climate bond particularly. Now, some but not all of the innovative financing mechanisms in the route map have the potential to generate a financial return for investors. That's why I've picked this one, but not all of them do. It's a mixture of innovative levies, loans, and investment opportunities. So many of you will be aware that the green bond market has grown stratospherically in recent years. Investors are increasingly looking to finance the transition to a net zero economy, but unfortunately, most of this growth has bypassed biodiversity. And in practice, some of it will almost certainly have harmed biodiversity, simply because biodiversity hasn't been factored into the equation. So the Nature Climate Bond, and this page, which you can't read the text of, but which is from the publication, is a concept that's been developed in discussions between Abundance Investment and the City of Edinburgh Council, with input from the Scottish Wildlife Trust. But let's just start by reminding ourselves what a bond actually is. A bond is basically an IOU. And as an investor, you put in some money, the money gets used for a purpose or purposes, and then sometime later you get your money back with interest. If you don't trust the issuer of the bond to give you your money back, you're very unlikely to invest in the first place. So the issuer needs to be a trusted party like a government. In this case, we're looking at local government. So the issuer of the bond would be a local authority. That means investors would provide the capital for the local authority to use, in this case on nature and climate action, and the local authority would commit to paying back the investors on a defined schedule and at an agreed rate of interest. So before we come onto how that actually works, it's important to understand that the Nature Climate Bond is innovative in 2 ways. First of all, Abundance Investment, which is a UK-based online investment platform, has pioneered a model of crowd-funded bonds, which are cheaper and more straightforward to issue than traditional bonds. They're also far more accessible to ordinary residents and citizens who can invest from as little as £5. So Abundance Investment have been doing this for a while and focusing largely on what we might call traditional green investments, for example, low carbon infrastructure and renewable energy. But the really groundbreaking aspect of the Nature Climate Bond, the concept that was developed as part of the £1 billion challenge, is the focus on biodiversity as well as climate change. And by looking holistically at the benefits of better and more connected green space, combining those with interventions designed to reduce CO2, this bond will tackle these 2 interconnected challenges together, rather than simply delaying action on biodiversity loss until it's too late, and then even more costly to try to rectify. So in terms of how it works in practice, it's not rocket science. We know there's a range of action that can be taken for nature and climate change that will also have economic and financial benefits. Some of these will lead to avoided costs and others will generate income. Some may even do both. So as an example, sustainable urban drainage systems, such as the one I mentioned earlier in Cumbernauld, are a good example of avoided costs, as they can save money on water treatment and avoid costs associated with flooding. By contrast, an income-generating example might be the installation of ground source heat pumps underneath a high-quality biodiverse green space. The heat pumps would provide clean energy that can be sold, while the green space simultaneously provides vital habitat for wildlife. And whether it's through avoided costs or new income streams, in practice, it's probably going to be a combination of both. Cash flows are created that can be used to repay investors over time. And by bundling the nature and climate benefits, it's also possible for some of the interventions to cross-subsidise others. So we can increase the nature climate impact and help meet the growing demand from investors looking to finance the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. So you can read through all of the 9 pillars in this document online. From an urban perspective, some of you may also be interested in taking a look at the vacant and derelict land fund concept, which highlights the possibility of turning vacant and derelict urban spaces to productive use through investment in green businesses such as vertical farms. Since the publication of the route map in May, the community of Scottish conservation finance pioneers, which formed to create the route map, but's grown significantly in number since then, has been really active online, and that's in a space provided by the Scottish Forum on Natural Capital. So if you're interested in conservation finance and would like to join this group, please drop a line to Rory MacLeod, the project officer for the Scottish Forum on Natural Capital, and you'll see Rory's email address on screen here. It's rmacleod@scottishwildlifetrust.org.uk. And I'd like to close with a reference to the recent Dasgupta review, which I'm sure will have been mentioned lots of times already during this important event. And the review highlighted that, quotes, investment in nature-based solutions would help us to address biodiversity loss and significantly contribute to climate change mitigation and adaptation, not to mention wider economic benefits. And it makes it very clear that nature is our most precious asset. And I like this picture, which illustrates really simply and powerfully how our economy is embedded in nature and not the other way around. So thanks again for inviting me here today. I wish you the best of luck for successful discussions in the remainder of the event, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jo, for that really stimulating presentation, which is starting to show us how we're getting closer to realising some of those innovative financing models, particularly with that nature climate bond in Edinburgh, and finding our way of getting across that chasm of incomprehension and scale. That's an image that I'm certainly going to be holding in my mind now. So we've gone from Glasgow City region to Scotland scale. We're now moving out to the European scale. And one of the work streams in the Connecting Nature programme has been exploring financing and resourcing mechanisms. And the session in the summit that follows this one, starting at 11:30, is going to be introducing nature-based enterprises and entrepreneurs. So for our last speaker in this slot, I'd like to introduce Esme from Horizon Newer, and she's going to give us a short introduction to some of the work that's been happening in the Connecting Nature programme around finance and business models and the Enterprise Guidebook. So thank you very much, and over to you, Esme.
Thank you for the introduction, Julie, and good morning, everyone. So my presentation today will be on the financing of nature-based solutions and nature-based entrepreneurship, and it will basically be a very short summary of the research we have been conducting in the Connecting Nature project over the past years. So I'll start with the financing of nature-based solutions. So nature-based solutions may be paid for in many different ways, and they're often financed by different sources. And this directly relates to the financing needs of NBS. So we have identified three major phases of financing of NBS. And the first phase is the planning of NBS, and this includes the design and the co-creation with stakeholders. The second phase is capital investment of NBS, and this is the actual delivery. And we see that this is over a relative short amount of time, but with a high amount of costs. And the third phase we identify is the ongoing operational costs of nature-based solutions, and this includes the monitoring and maintenance. And of course, the costs here are a bit lower in general, but they are spread over a longer period of time. Also, what we found in the research conducted is there's often a focus on the capital investment cost of nature-based solutions, so mainly the second phase, and that the public sector remains an important source of financing NBS. However, we also found that not enough consideration goes into the planning of long-term sustainable business models for nature-based solutions, and that to secure a return on investment for them. So these sustainable business models are based on go governance and go financing of nature-based solutions. And we see when this is done and when this is taken into account, we see a mix of public and private finance for nature-based solutions. So one of the tools we have developed within the Connecting Nature project for creating sustainable business models for nature-based solutions is this business model canvas. And the key differences between this business model canvas and the conventional one include a focus on the different types of value that are created by nature-based solutions, so environmental, social, and economic value, but also on the governance models. So this business model canvas has been deployed in the 10 connecting nature cities, and it was successful in bringing together stakeholders to explore alternative ways of financing and governing nature-based solutions. So with this shift towards alternative financing and governance models, we also see the shift from more of the public sector to the private sector. And this shift is, of course, much needed, as we found that finding skilled and experienced suppliers is a major roadblock for the public sector in the large-scale implementation of nature-based solutions in cities. So for this, collaboration with private and the third sector is needed. We've also found that enterprises can support cities, the private sector, and the third sector in the planning, delivery, and management of nature-based solutions. So these enterprises we call nature-based enterprises, and they use nature sustainably as a core element of their product or service offering, which could include nature-based solutions. We see that with this growing demand for nature-based solutions, enterprises see a market opportunity, and we see an increase year by year in the amount of enterprises active on the market. So to give you a very short example of what kind of enterprises could be involved in the delivery of a nature-based solution. So in the first stage, the planning stage of a nature-based solution, landscape architects and biodiversity experts could be involved. Then in the second stage of capital investment, specialized horticulture contractors could be involved. And then in the third phase that focuses more on stewardship and long-term management and maintenance, you could think of a social enterprise that takes over the management. So this was a very, very short overview of the research that we've done on financing and entrepreneurship for a nature-based enterprise. We have summarized the findings in 2 guidebooks, respectively on financing and on entrepreneurship. And we have also included practical tips for how to apply those strategies and how to stimulate entrepreneurship for nature-based solutions. So that was all from me for today. Thanks a lot for having me.
Thank you very much for that, Esme, and a really helpful reminder there about the importance of ongoing revenue as well as capital when we're looking at resourcing and financing nature-based solutions and developing those long-term sustainable solutions and business models, and the importance of the skills that the skill set that we need in the sector now to be able to deal with that. That certainly isn't the background that many of us came in from. So some real challenges there around new skills, new capacity, and new partnerships. So it's lovely now to welcome all of our speakers onto the screen, and Esme may be looking a little bit like, oh, I am here. We weren't certain whether it would be Esme or Siobhan who was joining us from Connecting Nature. Siobhan's been teaching a class at Trinity College today and hasn't been able to make it over, but Esme is quite capably stepping into that chair as well. So what we're going to do now is just have a short panel session and just pick up some questions and some conversations. And I'm going to ask all of our speakers the same question, but I'm going to ask them to answer it thinking about different scales. So the question I'm going to ask is, thinking about a green recovery, what would be your key policy asks or fiscal changes or financial interventions to ensure that we can scale up and resource urban nature-based solutions? So this could be at EU or national government level, it could be at council or municipality level. So it's that aspect of imagining you've just got that opportunity for one very short pitch to your First Minister, your convener, your council leader. And for those of you out there in digital land as well, we would love to hear your responses to this question. This is a fantastic opportunity to really crowdsource the collective brain power, knowledge, and experience of everyone sitting in this session. So those of you out there, please do start typing your responses into the chat. And if you see somebody type something that you agree with, please do, respond to endorse that. Please feel to pick up and run with Sunberlensis solution and have a wee riff on it and add to those suggestions. So I think as I've been giving those instructions to colleagues online, that's given a wee bit of thinking time to our panelists as well. So I'm going to start in the same order that we did the presentations, and I'm going to come to Catherine first. So Catherine, thinking at a regional or a city scale, what would be your key policy ask, your fiscal or financial intervention?
Thanks, Julie. Well, at the city region level, we're quite constrained by what we can do. We have to recognize that there are sort of national level initiatives that are not necessarily our ability to sort of change and influence specifically. So I'm going to focus very much on what Glasgow City Region can do. Unsurprisingly, I would sort of say it's not about one specific intervention, but this is really about a systems-wide approach. Given that this event is called Connecting Nature, I think connecting up is really quite significant and quite important to sort of recognize a holistic nature of where nature-based solutions sit within broader sort of policy reform or kind of fiscal and financial innovation. So I would certainly say how we can connect up communities and neighborhoods. I think it was Aileen Campbell who talked about them being the experts, and certainly they know what is best and what is needed for their communities and their neighborhoods. And certainly I think the opportunities and offers of nature-based solutions really speak to those values of how they can be improved on their doorstep and how to sort of serve and meet their needs. But I would also say sort of connecting up the financial community. I think, Joe has spoken very clearly about the sort of disconnect, let's say. So I would want to see how local authorities in Glasgow City Region can perhaps kind of better collaborate with financial institutions to sort of better understand and mitigate the sort of investment risks that perhaps are sort of regarded or perceived with nature-based solutions, and also how to sort of structure our innovative sort of financing instruments to sort of attract private investment. But speaking specifically to Glasgow City Region, I think we have a really interesting opportunity right now in front of us, actually, about how to connect up some of these audiences and how to use existing and current kind of policy initiatives. In my presentation, I talked about Clyde Mission. And I think Clyde Mission is an example of how we want to avoid making the mistakes of the past. So particularly about the sort of city region deals that invested in all of that kind of grey infrastructure. How can we do things differently? And Clyde Mission has a call out at the moment. Deadline is Monday, 29th of March. So we have a few days. So with people living in Glasgow City Region, please submit your views and ideas of how you think Clyde Mission, together with government and private investment, can be securing and investing in those nature-based solutions, particularly in that urban context around the River of the Clyde, to secure that kind of better future. And I think, Clyde Mission, this is a perfect opportunity to really be engaging with our kind of current policy context and initiatives, and to be ensuring that nature-based solutions are sort of embedded and aligned across all the different work we're trying to do. So I'll leave it there.
That's great. Thank you very much, Catherine. And a really good call to action for people listening. Something you can tangibly do now to make this happen in Glasgow. And those themes around, connectivity, collaboration, alignment and embedding, I think are absolutely critical. And we see so many of those green deals, those interventions that don't really deliver, those city deals don't really deliver for us. So I'm going to turn to Joe now, because Joe's work's been working both at local levels and at national levels. So in terms of your ask to national government, whether that's Scotland or UK, what would that be, Joe?
Thanks, Julie. And I thought Catherine made some really good points there. I think when we had all of the discussions with different stakeholders as part of the £1 billion challenge, there were three things that emerged that we termed a kind of enabling framework, if you like, to be able to take things from just these sort of opportunities and a mixture of different financing mechanisms, but what needs to underpin those to actually help them succeed. And the first one of those was policy coherence. The second was, some initial investment, and the third one was all about sort of coordination and shared learning. So if I park that third one for the moment, because quite a lot of that is already happening within the community of Scottish conservation finance pioneers. So to government, I think if we were to focus on policy coherence and investment specifically, I think the policy coherence argument is incredibly powerful, because as somebody in the whiskey industry said to us during the £1 billion challenge, there's no point in that. We love this challenge, it's great, and we're really supportive, but there's no point in developing all of these fantastic new sources of funding if at the same time we don't, for example, sort out things like harmful subsidies, which is attracting a lot of attention internationally. It's not just a Scottish issue. So first of all, I would suggest, in terms of thinking about urban green infrastructure, nature networks are really, really important. So to come back to the core theme of connecting nature, I think if we're to get the best possible value for the taxpayers' money, we need to think about planning natural infrastructure strategically. We don't plan grey infrastructure in a random way. We wouldn't ever build a road if that road didn't connect to something. So we need to think of nature in that regard. Secondly, on the policy coherence side, an example of what could be implemented in terms of thinking about how we make everybody part of the solution and how, in this case, developers work, is to think about what is called biodiversity net gain south of the border, but net to make sure all developments are net positive for nature by the National Planning Framework for next year. I think that would be a really important step forward. So finally, I would say on the investment side, government plays a really, really crucial role in unlocking some of these sources of new funding from the private sector. And we've seen it time and time again in all of the people we've talked to from our international partners and so on. So we need some kind of investment readiness facility. And we've been calling for that, because we're not going to get from the standing start that we're sort of roughly at the moment. I mean, all sorts of interesting things are happening, but we're not going to get from where we are to suddenly having sort of self-sustaining initiatives that are entirely paid for by magical private finance if we don't plug the gap with something that helps develop those markets, build capacity and so on. And I think the Investment Readiness Fund, my understanding of the work that's been done elsewhere, including south of the border, but even including a few years ago with the European Investment Bank, is you often need a little bit more help in those early stages than people might expect. So that early stage investment is really, really crucial, I think.
That's excellent. Thank you very much for that, Joe. And I was hearing those words about policy coherence and remembering somebody yesterday was talking about the fact that we have an embarrassment of policy initiatives, which are often conflicting policy initiatives. And I think that is a huge challenge there. And you've started to address a couple of the comments that were coming up in chat around where does the polluter pay initiative kind of fit in, which is what we're hearing in terms of the whiskey industry response, and what is the role of taxation in terms of some of those models. It isn't an either or. It's not all private finance. There's a real role for the public sector and public financing in stimulating this and those initial investments. So you mentioned there the European Bank as well in this. So I'll now come to Esme to take us up to that European scale. If you have a particular ask for either policy or fiscal or finance interventions, what would that be?
Thank you, Julie. So I will rephrase your question a bit, because that's I would look a bit more into entrepreneurship, because that's what I've done research in and that's what I know. So we've conducted a large survey under EU enterprises, and we found that a lot of them are small to micro enterprises. So a lot of enterprises that deliver nature-based solutions at the moment are small. And also what they would say their barrier is, or their barriers are, is that there's still a lack of awareness of the sector, but also of NBS in general. And also mainly among policymakers. So I think if you would look at an EU level, I think it would be very important that the EU will champion not only nature-based solutions, but also nature-based enterprises, and very much should communicate about this sector, and about the potential of the sector that it could have in the green recovery. And I agree with the points made by Joe as well, that networks are very important in this, of course, because networks can very much promote the sector and their activities, and also coherence in policy on every level, is of course of key importance as well. So yeah, I think those would be the main from an EU level for supporting enterprise.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks for that. And I know we'll be hearing a lot more about enterprise in the session coming up. And I think that's important, of recognising the scale, because we've talked a lot about community, and communities are the expert as well. So what are those roles for those community, social enterprises, social entrepreneurs in delivering nature-based solutions, as well as the larger scale government interventions and private sector? Okay, I'm going to ask one final question to all of our speakers, and I'm looking for a fairly quick response on this. And I'm borrowing a question that was asked at the Glasgow Place Commission yesterday, and it was an interesting one. Fast forwarding yourself now to 2030 and looking back now to where we are in 2021, what would your future self be saying to you now in terms of, I wish we had done this one thing now that would set us on the route to success for resourcing nature-based solutions? Now, that might be a wish that you might make for an individual or an organisation or a sector. Those of you watching, again, please do feel free to type that in chat. So, Joe, I'm going to come to you first off. What's your one wish looking back from 2030 to now, if only we had done?
Well, that's a great question, actually, and it's the $1 million question, isn't it? It's got to be about urgency. I mean, I think COP26 gives us, the best reason that I can think of to really step up the urgency. It's probably the most important, environmental event that arguably has ever taken place, and it's happening in Scotland. So I think it's making sure that urgency is understood in a positive way. There are positives that we can get from this for a green recovery from, the pandemic that we all need to find a way out of. I think the looking back thing is all going to be about urgency. So I hope that's brilliant. What we can achieve.
Yeah. Urgency, thank you. And COP26, if you haven't already been to the expert and given your suggestions for that, please do. So we're getting close on time, so I'm just going to come quickly now to Catherine for your one wish looking back from the future.
Well, I like Joe's response about urgency. I couldn't agree more, but I would say innovation. Don't be afraid to take risks. I think certainly within the public sector, private sector, there's a real kind of fear of taking risks and experimentation. And I think it's only through experimentation we're going to learn, and we're going to change and transform in a way that we really need to with the current challenges that we face. And it's not just about innovation in terms of technical. I'm talking about sort of policy innovation, social innovation, having those conversations with people that we don't normally do. So innovate like crazy.
And what a perfect line to finish this session on when they're with the Connecting Nature Innovation Summit. It's about innovation, and it's about urgency, and it's about starting to do things now at all scales. So brilliant. Thank you so much, all of you, for your contributions today. Really interesting, insightful, inspiring presentations and discussions. And with that, I shall hand over now to my colleague, Emma Halliday, to let us know what happens next for today. So thank you all very much for your wonderful contributions today. Over to you, Emma.